Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the blindseyepodcast, the podcast discussing everything you did and didn't want to know about being blind. My name is Connor, and today I thought we would talk about flying and using planes at air travel when you can't see. So I've done a little bit of this, and there's a bit of a different process when you can't see or have no vision. So I thought, we would get into that. Usual disclaimer that these are just my thoughts and opinions and experiences, so keep that in mind. Okay, so when it comes to flying blind, for lack of a better word, there are a few things you have to consider. So firstly, are you bringing your guide dog or seeing eye dog with you, or are you not? But in either case, you will book special assistance, and basically that means that you are down in the system as needing assistance, and they will help you in the airport to get onto the plane, on the plane, and to get off the plane, get through the destination airport, and to wherever you need to be. Generally, that's how it works. I haven't come across any that don't do that, but all the major airlines and airports have this kind of system in place. There is a slight difference, funnily enough, when you're booking if you have a guide dog or seeing eye dog, because at least here in Australia, some of the carriers want to know how long and tall your dog is. But funnily enough, they want to know how long your dog is, excluding the tail and the neck and the head, which is just weird. So they just want to know like the square shape of the dog. So I've had to book that a few times, and it's just weird. So I'm guessing they have a method to it, but it's weird. So with that in mind, you'll go to the airport and you will want, ideally, to get dropped off by somebody that you know, because it's just more straightforward. But otherwise, you might get dropped off by a taxi or something similar. And in cases where I've gotten dropped off by a taxi, what I will usually do is see if the driver can get me as close to the door as possible and maybe find a security guard, or I will get the dog to find the door, and then I'll basically just try and look as blind as possible so that I get some assistance. Or I might ask somebody who's passing if they could help me out and find a ground staff member. And that's always generally worked. So when that happens, I ask them if they can bring me to the special assistance desk for the airline, and every airline has one of these as far as I'm aware. And the special assistance desk is basically like any other check-in, but they note down anything that you might need, and you can wait there while they get somebody to come and assist you. Now, the downside to the special assistance desk is that, especially for an international flight, you'll just find yourself hanging around there for a couple of hours on your own. You don't really have the luxury of doing any shopping or going for something to eat and things like that. So that's why it's always best if you can go with somebody, because then you're not missing out on that. You're already going to be sitting on a plane for however many hours, and the last thing you want to do is add even more hours of sitting down to that time frame. I have also found, since I got the dog, that part of the problem is getting through the check-in area, because all the flight attendants usually want to see the dog, they want to talk about the dog and all that. And, I'm not opposed to being spoken to by flight attendants, but when you have a plane to catch, it's kind of problematic. So anyway, they'll bring you through security. Sometimes you might even get through security a bit quicker because you're with somebody from the airport. They'll bring you to the gate and sit you down, and then they'll tell the people who are the flight attendants for the gate who you are, and somebody will come and grab you when the gate actually opens. When the gate opens, they'll bring you on the plane, usually first with people who might have children or things like that, and they'll find your seat and they'll go through a bit of a rundown with you. So if I have the dog with me, what happens is she gets the footwell of the seat next to me. And I've only ever flown with her when I've been flying for work, so I'm not sure, but I'm fairly certain they had to pay for an extra seat. Don't quote me on that, but I think that's what actually had to happen. So she sits on the footwell and she gets given a little absorbent mat to sit on just in case there are any accidents, which thankfully there hasn't been thus far. It also means if you have the dog with you that you get put at the front of economy where you have a little bit more leg room between the seat and the bulkhead. So it kind of pays off because the dog has more space, but it also means my legs have more space. So it's a double win in my book. The other thing, if you have the dog, is whether you use a flight muzzle. Now, a flight muzzle is a piece of material which is supposed to go around the nose and the snout and the mouth of the dog if the captain so requires. I have one and I have to have it on me by law if I'm on a plane, but the enforcement of it is basically up to the captain of the actual plane. So as yet, I haven't actually had to use one, but it's just, I guess, if somebody decides, hey, I want to be extra sure, there's a dog on my plane and I want to make sure the dog can't bite anybody. I've never heard of it happening and I've never heard of anybody having to use it, but I have to have it on me just in case. The other thing that happens when you get sat down is obviously you get acquainted to where the buttons are for the call button or the air conditioning and also the safety instructions. And the safety instructions have to be a little bit different, obviously, especially because I don't know Braille, so them giving me the Braille cards doesn't mean anything to me. But thankfully, I've also flown a lot in my life, so I know the deal. One of the things, though, that I need to know is how many rows in front and behind me it is to the bathroom and to the emergency exit, because in the event that you do have to get off, and in the event that it's one of those landings that never happens where you'll orderly get off the plane without any panic, you need to know. So what I will do is I will ask the flight attendant to count how many seats in front of me and to the left or to the right, and how many seats behind me to the left or to the right. And what it means is that when I'm going to the bathroom, I can just put my hand on each headrest as I go by and count, and then I know where I am. And, sometimes that means you're accidentally bumping into people, but it's a plane and everybody kind of bumps into each other anyway, so it just comes with the territory. It is a bit hard when you're on the plane because people might need to be getting past you and they can't catch your eye because you can't see them. So I always try and have a bit of a chat with the person I'm next to and say, look, if you need to get past, just tap me or give me a bump or something. Don't feel shy, but I just won't know that you need to. And for that reason myself, I always try and get a seat that's on the aisle, which is a shame because I used to like the view of looking out the window, but obviously I don't need the view and I don't need the hassle of trying to get past other people. I actually did have a trip once where the guy beside me didn't want to wake me up, so he just would jump over me as I was asleep and just jump himself back into his seat, jump out, and I didn't even know what was happening. And he was a cool guy, but it just means I didn't have to worry about it. So when you're trying to go to the bathroom, I'll either hit the call button or I'll just get up and head towards where they've told me it is. Usually the call button I might use the first couple of times just to get my bearings, but generally I found it's pretty good. Everybody's in the same position. You're all in a flying tin can. So for the most part, I find people are pretty understanding because they have to be understanding with everybody, not just somebody like myself. So when you get to your destination, what happens is you're the last off the plane. So you get told to wait and somebody from the ground staff or one of the flight attendants will come and get you after everybody else has gotten off the plane, which is fair, because you're the first on, so it's already fair that you're maybe the last off. In some cases, depending on what airport or country you're in, you might find different experiences when you're getting off and on the planes, which I'll speak about now in a few minutes. But as a rule, somebody will just come and help you get off, and they will ask you, where do you need to be? Do you have any baggage to collect? Any of those kinds of things. So you will go and collect your baggage, which can be interesting if you don't have a good idea of what it looks like, which is a story I definitely have for another episode when I'm talking about holidays I've been on. But yeah, you'll find your baggage, and I will usually just say, look, I'm either meeting somebody or I need a taxi. And if it's a country that you don't really know the language, I just say taxi, 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 taxi. And they're not, short of getting the idea. So in the situation where you're meeting somebody, that can be a little bit more tricky because you have to try and explain to them who is meeting you and what they might look like and all these kinds of things. But that's a little bit more straightforward because hopefully whoever you're meeting will just come towards you as they see you arrive. But I have had a few instances where I'm just standing in the middle of the arrivals hall hoping whoever I'm meeting will come and see me. So yeah, that's basically the rundown of how it works. So at this point, at least in all the countries I've flown in and within Australia, it's fairly well worked out. I mean, so many people travel for work and for different things that the people you're encountering have come across people with disabilities or people who are blind before. For the most part, it's a much easier experience than you might get in the general public just because it's such a commonplace occurrence and they have lots of things in place. Doesn't mean things can't go wrong and you don't have some interesting or less than ideal experiences. And I guess that's what I wanted to finish up on. So what can happen when you're traveling is you can kind of get dumped somewhere. So I had an instance where when I was 17, I finished high school and everybody was going to schoolies to celebrate, being free and all this kind of stuff. And one of my friends asked me to go. It was probably a good thing I didn't go in hindsight, but I didn't want to be the only one not going and having fun. So I saved up to go and visit my family in Ireland over the Christmas break. So I was the first time as well that I was going on my own and I was traveling on my own. And so I had arranged all of the special assistance and stuff. But when I got to Frankfurt Airport in Germany, I was passing through and I had a 5-hour layover. And because I was on my own, I basically just got dumped in a room until the next flight was boarding. So that can be less than ideal. And I think at the time, it was before iPods, or I don't think I had an iPod. I think I maybe had an MP3 player that had 90 minutes worth of music on it. And the plane I was on didn't have a USB charger. So I was out. And I think at the time I still had like a Discman and the batteries on the Discman had gone flat. So I was basically sitting there looking at 5 hours of time that I couldn't fill with anything that I had on me. And thankfully, I came across this family whose father had had a back injury on holiday, and they were getting special assistance as well. But they were going to go to the Qantas Club Lounge and asked me if I wanted to come. So what happened was they had 2 younger sons, and they basically just pretended that I was their eldest son and brought me along with them because they didn't want me sitting on my own. And so we just went into the club lounge and drank and ate for free until the plane gate opened, which was pretty awesome of them because, otherwise I just would have been sat there on my own for ages. The other interesting thing that has happened when I went to America, I mentioned just a few minutes ago about what kind of things happen when you get off the plane or are going to the plane with the special assistance. So in America, if you have any kind of disability, they will almost always turn up with a wheelchair. So I know quite a few people who are blind who have had a wheelchair turn up to get them off the plane, even though you don't need one. And I had heard of this, but thought, it won't happen to me. I'm young. That just won't be a thing. And it did happen to me. So when I arrived, they arrived with a wheelchair. And the first time I said, look, I'm not getting in that wheelchair. I've been on a flight for 14 hours. I'm not sitting in a wheelchair. I don't need the wheelchair. I don't like how that looks. So no, I refused. And they took it away. But when I was coming home, from the States, they said that I had to get in the wheelchair from the special assistance check-in area. So I had to go through all of security, the whole way through the entirety of the airport to the gate on the wheelchair. And I refused at first, and they said they wouldn't bring me if I didn't sit in the wheelchair. And again, I was trying to say, look, I don't need the wheelchair. I don't want the wheelchair, and I'm about to sit in a cramped, crappy seat for 14 hours, so I definitely don't want the wheelchair. But they weren't having it. Basically, they told me they wouldn't bring me to the gate unless I got in the wheelchair. So that's what I did, and I just pissed myself laughing the whole way to the gate because of how ridiculous it was. But for some reason, that's a wacky setup they have. The second last little story I have is one time, I think it was the same time I might have been going through Frankfurt in Germany. It was the middle of winter, and the lady that was helping me get from one end of the airport to the other was also helping this gentleman in a wheelchair. It was somebody else, not the family I mentioned. But she was wearing like a really big winter coat, and it was made of nylon or polyester or something. And I don't know if it's because of the weather outside or the fact that she was pushing the wheelchair and I was holding onto her arm, but every few meters we were getting really violent static electricity to the point where you could hear it cracking. And it was really hard because we had probably the best part of a kilometer's walk. And by the end of it, I had to actually just hold on to the wheelchair of the guy that was walking with us and hope I wouldn't get shocked, because it was just, I don't know, there was something electric between us. But that's the worst static electricity I ever had in my life. So I don't know what was in that jacket, or whether it was just Germany or whatever. But that was interesting, when you're trying to walk and those kinds of things happen. The last and one of the best things that happened was a time when I was flying, and the cabin crew that I was flying out on just happened to be the exact same cabin crew 2 weeks later when I was flying home. And I was flying international. So it was really weird because they remembered me. And because they had remembered me, they basically hooked me up on the way home. So I had a good chat with them on the way over and all this kind of stuff. And so 2 weeks later, they remembered me. And when I got on the plane, they basically made arrangements to put me in, I don't know if it was premium economy or business class, and hooked me up with drinks for the whole flight home. So it really does pay to be a memorable face and to be kind, because it can pay off. And I've never had an instance where, the cabin crew I had on the way over was the same I had. And I could almost kind of get it in a day, in the same day, but I never thought 2 weeks later it would be the exact same crew. To a man, it was the exact same crew, the same manager, everything. So, it does go well. So that's my rundown of how flying works. As I mentioned, I do have some stories about holidays where a little bit of this can kind of lead into, but I want that to be its own episode because there's a lot more going on. So this is a little teaser. But that's how it works, and I think more people should do it. I guess, when we are allowed to fly again and should go outside of our own countries, because I miss it and it's good fun. So anyway, you can get in touch with the show by emailing blindseyepodcast@gmail.com. That's BLINDSEYE podcast@gmail.com. You can tweet me at blindseyepod on Twitter. And you can find the Facebook page by searching for Blindseye Podcast. And I will speak to you next week. Cheers.